Hey guys, today I'm here with Jason Caluori. Jason is partnered with us on certain projects. He's an extremely accomplished digital marketer, and he and I have a lot in common in our following of some of the law of implication, which is basically the philosophy that David Mills spends a lot of time talking about, and it's had a huge impact on our lives. And so today we wanted to talk about this concept of cleaning the window. And so if you guys haven't heard about this before, my interpretation, my understanding of it is basically we go through life, and we're trying to accomplish goals. We're basically trying to get certain things done, whether that be monetary goals or relationship goals, health goals, your own personal peace of mind. And the thing is like we have our own perspective. We're looking out a window, and that is sort of like shaping our perspective. And it could be a dirty window, it could be a clean one, it could be one that has like a tint on it, and basically it's David has been talking a lot, and we'll link to this to the source material here, but he talks a lot about examining how it is that you see, examining what's going on in that window in which you're looking out. And I spent some time thinking about this, and I kind of see it as sort of like two different camps. It's like your window it could be on one hand, it's like the hidden goals that you might have and not be aware of. And then on the other hand, it's kind of like the way you're being and the way that you're sort of the way that you're being. And I don't know. I mean, Jason, I've been talking a little bit about this. Maybe you want to jump in or.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. So one of the things I experienced early on was this idea of scenarios, how we look at things with our mind's eye. And it felt like really difficult at first. It wasn't intuitive for me. But there was this book that David recommended called Psychopictography.
Yeah.
I just grabbed it off my shelf.
Right.
And it's filled with these, they call them mental pictures. And they're like these illustrations that kind of, see, scenarios are actually really easy. We use them. Like my wife, I went upstairs yesterday after a webinar, and she was unpacking groceries, and she had steaks that she was putting away.
Mm-hmm.
And my mind was imagining cooking steaks the next day, because she's like, oh, I've got steaks for tomorrow's dinner. And so my mind just imagined them grilling, cooking on the grill and smelling them. So scenarios are actually really easy to use. It's just for some reason, if you're not using them kind of proactively to look at things, because some of them will just kind of come to us, but other times there's this power we can get in building with them and looking at certain things. So there's, I just wanted to kind of read one of them that I had bookmarked. That's okay.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So there's this one that's it's called Always Remember in Your Castle. It's on page 103, and the guy kind of blocks them out so that the mental picture is right between these lines. So he says, people remark, I get discouraged so easily. Suppose I set up my success program, but I lose my drive. How can I zoom ahead once more? Right. And I've experienced that too. You kind of maybe get stuck along the way to a goal or something. Something gets in your way. So the mental picture is a king was out hunting with his princes in a forest many miles from his castle. A sudden snowstorm fell on the party. In the confusion, the king was separated from others. When he failed to return to the castle after 4 days, he was given up as lost. But on the 5th day, he appeared in the warm dining room. Someone asked him how he had found the strength to keep going. The king replied, I remembered all the castle means to me. So I really liked that, because I'll do that at times, right? You just kind of go back to my breakthrough vision, and it keeps me it reminds me of some kind of setback, but that's okay, because it might just be a sticking point that I can dissolve with law of implication. So
I love those images. Yeah, no, that's a really great one. So, for those of you who, are maybe unaware or just haven't encountered this, one of the big things that we spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about is building scenarios when it comes to your planning, or even when it comes to thinking, and how the brain is it just works way more powerfully, and it's able to think way more clearly when you have like these mental pictures. And that mental picture that you talked about, like in that book, that's awesome, and that's like great. You can keep that story and that image in your head, or when you're coming up against an issue, or when you don't want to go any further. One of the ones from that book that I think about a lot is, there was this story of there was a guy who was like, he was walking, and he had like this like big stick, and it had like these weights on it. And then he also had like a bunch of rocks that were tied around his waist, and he had other weights that were on his legs. And he's walking, and somebody walks up to him and is like, "Hey, why don't you take off those weights on your legs?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, good idea." And then he's walking some more, and it's easier. And somebody's like, "Hey, why don't you get rid of that belt with those other weights?" And he does it, and it's even easier. And then finally, someone's like, "Hey, you've got this weight on your shoulders. Why don't you drop that?" And he was like, "Oh, great," And it's so crazy because like, I think everyone can relate to, there's all of these things that we're carrying with us. We're trying to accomplish our goals. We're trying to walk. We're trying to go somewhere. And we've got, things that we're carrying. And a lot of times we're unaware of it. And this is actually, one of the things I love about law of implication is how, what's the word that David uses to describe it? It's like every little bit kind of relates to the whole thing. There's a phrase
Yeah,
for
it's
that.
like I imagine it like a tree. Like there's kind of the core of law of implication, like how to know what's true and the method, and then there's these branches,
Mm-hmm.
and they lead you back. Like if you want to investigate the concept of respect, eventually you find your way back at the trunk of the tree,
Yeah.
with that question.
No, that's totally right. But yeah, and we were talking about like letting go of what you're carrying. If you're on your way, there's a song. It's literally that's all they say in the song. It's pretty good. But it reminds me, going back to this idea of hey, the window in which you're looking.
Mhm.
What happens, I think, is that like what I've experienced in my own life is that there's you're carrying a lot. There's a lot in
Yeah,
that window. There's a lot in the window that's messing up the way that you're viewing things. And a lot of times it's completely invisible. And, I can give you, like a great example. So I remember I was talking to a friend of mine, and here it is. She was worried about getting a promotion at work, right? She really wanted this promotion, and she was like stressing about it, and I asked her, I'm like, let's walk through this exercise together. And for you guys can, anybody watching, you can do this exact same exercise. I guarantee you, it's going to be, like so impactful. And what I said to her is like, okay, when do you think it's likely, or a possibility that you'd get this promotion? And she's like, well, maybe sometime in March. I'm like, okay, let's imagine that it's fast forward, it's March, and I want you to see yourself like walking to your boss's office, and I want to see yourself like sitting down, and then she tells you, hey, you've been doing this great work, and I'm really happy to let you know that you've got this promotion. And then I'm like, well, and then she's like, okay. And I'm like, well, how do you feel in that moment? She's like, oh my God, I feel amazing. And I'm like, all right. Yeah. And then how was that different with how you felt just a second ago? Because, she was really nervous about this promotion. She's like, oh, it's a world of difference. And I'm like, okay, well, can you now see that in the background, you didn't know it, but in the background, you're thinking you're not going to get the promotion? Because like, when you
yeah,
go through this scenario of you getting the promotion, you feel amazing, but obviously you weren't feeling that way before, which means like you're looking at the situation and you don't realize that you have this, I'm not going to get this promotion, that's in your window. And that happens all the time, where people like, they just have these things that are acting on them. Like another great
yeah.
example of this. I remember have you ever had like have you ever had the experience where it's like like you want something so bad and then you think it's impossible. And then like later on, you like, you get it and it's like, oh my gosh, and
Yeah, and it
it's,
might have even been like easier than you like you thought like, hey, this is impossible. How could this happen? Like how could this happen for me? And then after you get it, you're like, oh, this was actually pretty clear and easy to get this thing.
yeah.
Maybe even forget that the impossibility was even an idea, like that you had kind of thought it never would happen. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's important to notice. It's like, I think that it can be misinterpreted. Like what I'm not saying is, I'm not saying to like work yourself into a frenzy where you think you're going to get something. You know what I mean? Like it's not about like, oh, just like imagining, you're going to get it. Like, cause it, in the case of that promotion, it's totally possible that she wouldn't get it. It's totally possible that, there are things that that would prevent that from happening. Like there's no certainty around it, just because, she saw what it feels like to achieve
but
that goal.
David's talked about how fear can really like paralyze us. So
Oh
you could
yeah.
be like, I'm just you think about the like making more money, asking your boss for money, and then there's just this like wall. It's like blank screen, and you're just like afraid of something. You can't really put your finger on it. Maybe it's just getting rejected, and it's like, oh no, or maybe the boss is mad now that you even
Yeah.
asked and offended. Like, how could you ask me that? And
Well,
he's talked
mhm.
about like once you like penetrate the veil like around the corner, like our mind doesn't really go around the corner and look at like, well, you walk up to your boss and say, hey, you ask them the question, and even if they say no, then what happens next? Like
Yeah.
our mind doesn't do that for us. It'll basically just throw up like a feeling and say, hey, you should feel bad about asking for a raise. And once we like build out the scenario, we can just play it forward. If you do get a no, then hey, couldn't you ask like a while later again? Like, couldn't you
Yeah.
ask every 6 months or every 3 months? Couldn't you
Well,
like work on a project and then deliver that and be like, hey, look at this. Hey, how about a
yeah. And
raise?
now
Like,
what? Are we
yeah,
good yet? Well, I think that there's like two things at play. Like one of the things that you're talking about, which is excellent, is planning and proper planning. But I think another thing that's also at play a lot of times is even more hidden goals. So, a lot of times people talk about this idea of like self-sabotage, or the visual that I like to use about it is, you're driving a car, but you're driving with the brakes on, you
mm-hmm.
know? And it's like, I think that's what happens. Again, this is like the window thing where you're driving, but you don't realize you've got the brakes on. So for example, since we keep on talking about this promotion analogy, but like, I want, to let people know, like, this works for if you're, trying to do a sales call, and if you're trying to grow your business. It's really for like any goal. But, just continue, not to confuse things, to continue with the promotion, you know, some person might have the goal to be promoted, but at the same time, they have the goal not to be rejected.
Yep,
You know what I mean? Not to be said no to. Like that's like a legit big goal in somebody's mind, is like, oh, I don't want to feel that somebody said no to me. And it's like, that is the perfect example of, like you're driving with the brakes on. You know what I mean? You've got
yep,
one thing, you got one vector moving you in one direction. This is your conscious choice, your conscious goal. But at the same time, you've got this unconscious goal, the goal to not be rejected, which is having, or the goal to keep on looking good, even if it's just looking good to yourself. That's having like a massive like impact on you and actually preventing you from going what you're going through. I remember so me and my brother, we actually got into a fight a couple of weeks ago. And like we got into this fight, and I called him up and I apologized to him, and like like there's how like whenever there's like a fight or whatever, there's always two
mm-hmm.
sides. It's never like
Yep,
100% one person's fault. There's always like a little bit of both, but the way that I approached it was, and this is something that I've learned over the years, like it's taken me a long time to learn, and I'm actually still kind of developing it, is that like, I'm like, well, I want a relationship with him, and I don't care about being right. You know what I mean? There's the
Yeah.
like the goal is to have the relationship, and the counter goal, which prevents that, is like, wanting to be right all the time. Feeling like there needs to be a sense of justice. Oh well,
Yep.
I'll be right. I'll have a relationship only if he admits half of the fault. Well, screw that. Like,
Yeah.
no, like what are you really committed to? What do you really want? Do you want to have a relationship, or you want to be fucking right? And then it's the same thing with like, this promotion thing. Do you really want a promotion, or do you want to like never be rejected in your life? Do you really want to grow your agency, or do you just never want to have somebody tell you no? And it's
Yeah.
like that's the window that people don't even realize that like what's going on. And so, I think like the one part is realizing like what's going on there. But then to your point, Jason, the other part is like, okay, well, you know, if you can remove those things, now it's like, can we get some proper planning, so I can actually achieve my goals?
Yeah.
And, like we've been really lucky to, sort of like have a front row seat of like seeing David plan in these like Dungeons and Dragons, meetings. And, what have you learned from seeing like him plan and the way that he's approaching these things?
Just that, like by default, in Dungeons and Dragons, we actually come across like dangerous caves with trolls and things that could just wipe out our party if we rushed into the cave. By default, we like want to rush into the cave, or we'll be like, oh, let's just fail forward and we'll just
Yeah.
figure it out once we get in there. And David has this method and this approach of just not rushing into the cave. We have kind of time on our side, so we can kind of poke around and get a sense of what's in the cave, what we can know before we go into the cave. And then we end up with kind of stacking what we can know. And then we all of a sudden we have like, we've kind of deconstructed the cave and like denuted that like camp, that whatever you call it, like experience from kind of wrecking us. Cause it's kind of designed to be difficult, but David kind of flips it on its head. And all of a sudden we're like half the monsters are dead before we even enter the cave. And we just
Yeah.
kind of know where the traps are. And it's just, we get into the cave and we're like, Mike's like, oh yeah, this was actually going to be really, really hard as how it was designed. And he didn't make it easier for us. He was just like, yeah, this could have happened. You could have got pushed in this hole and this and this and this. And it's constantly like not rushing the cave. And we just follow David's method and we end up like winning battles. So
It's awesome. And just to like really make this concrete, because I don't know if everyone's like played Dungeons and Dragons. This is like the first campaign I've ever been on. But just imagine like you got like 5 of your, other warriors together, and like some of them are wizards or whatever, and you're outside of a castle or a fortress. You're about to invade the fortress, and you don't know that, like, you don't know what's in there. And so David says, like, the poking around, like David says, oh yeah, well, I'm just going to turn into a bat, because like that's part of his like powers as a wizard or whatever. And I'm just going to scope out the entire thing. And so he basically turns into a bat. He scopes it all out. He's hidden, and now suddenly we know everything that's in there. And then we can come up with a plan to go room by room and just destroy everybody. And, like it's crazy.
We like literally win before we attack. Like
that's exactly
and
it.
it's happening for people that haven't played it. I hadn't played it before too. You hadn't played it before too, but Mike, David, and the other party members had played. Is that it's happening in what they call the theater of the mind, which is conceptual space. We'll have like a map or something, but the game is kind of playing out conceptually in each of our minds as we go through it. So it's kind of like this book where it's like happening in your mind's eye, and then so it's really, really useful for that, because the more you do that, the easier it feels. The more you access your mind's eye for these things, build these concepts, I find it's easier and easier to just use it kind of whenever you need it.
Yeah. But one thing I think is fascinating is that I think somebody can listen to that and they might think to themselves, okay, I've got to make this master plan before I go out there and execute, and in the realm of like making money online, which is, we've both, been able to do, especially over the last couple of years, it's, it's a mixture. It's a mixture of like planning, but then also like taking the action. And so,
Yep.
note it wasn't we're sitting outside of the castle or the cave coming up with a great plan. It's, hey, let's send a bat in there to figure out what rooms are where all the danger is. And the
Yeah.
way that it works in business, for example, is maybe you have maybe you're trying to get like a client for your agency, and what you could do is develop a sales script, or what I mean, or develop like a sales presentation. And you could come up with that presentation and then go out there, speak with a few business owners, see how it works. And then, all right, well, based off of that feedback, you're scoping it out, you're testing things. Based off your feedback, you come back and maybe make a little bit of changes. Maybe you adjust your offer a little bit, and you'll plan it out that way. And then you go back in and you can test it out. So with Dungeons and Dragons, like I love it from, seeing how much deliberate thought goes into things. But that's also like, it's a game where, it's kind of life or death, because
Yeah.
like your characters will die, like could die if you just rush in and there's axes and stuff like that. In a lot of the goals that we're going after, and people are going after just in their daily lives, the stakes aren't that high.
Yeah.
It's not like, if you rush in, you're going to be completely blown out and then you don't, and then you don't have another shot. And so
Yeah.
what I found for myself is actually rushing in real life does kind of work, because it lets me like smash up against reality,
Yeah.
it lets me see like, okay, what do things really look like? I poke around by kind of like rushing in a lot of cases. I don't
Yeah,
know
and
what are your
it's
thoughts on
like
that?
with law of implication too, like where to rush around, like where to poke around. Like if you're trying to make money online and you want to do it with clients, like you haven't talked to your first client, like talking to your first clients like super valuable. Like the feedback you get, like it shows you um where to kind of put all your resources, like where the impact is. And yeah, like trying to plan for weeks and weeks and weeks about like every word, like rebuttal, instead of just like going out and talking to people and just like
Yeah.
it'll just show you where the impact is, which is so valuable.
Yeah. I mean, I think of, to a certain extent, I view, trying to map out your every word in a sales call. Like I kind of view that a little bit like, I think the fighting analogy is really good. I really think that it works out really well. And the way that it breaks down is like a sale and a sales conversation is not a fight. I think sales is like a really beautiful thing because you get to give somebody the gift of clarity, to find out like, really, is this your goal? And, really get them clear on, what it's worth for them to achieve their goal. I think that's a
Yeah.
great service you give to people. But the way that it is like a fight is that, to become a good fighter, like whether it's wrestling or martial arts or boxing or things like that, there's like a repetition. There's constantly going into it, and then learning certain moves and then knowing when to deploy those moves based off of
Hmm.
where the conversation is going. And so it's actually one of those things where the best thing you can do is just get the live reps in, like
Yeah.
your plan is you get the live reps in and then to afterwards go back and think about it and then make your adjustments and then go back in and then test it out even more.
Yeah, you need like the real world feedback. I mean, this comes up with I find it with like automations. Like I work with a lot of like email automations, and there's kind of a theory of like you can plan out this perfect automation with like maybe 100 emails, and you're just gonna like attach that to a business that's just gonna work. But in reality, what you really want to do is like talk to, like you want it to kind of be semi-automated where you're like talking to the people that are going to get the emails and getting feedback from them, and you're kind of building it out along the way. And then it's attached to a feedback loop instead of just thinking hey, I have the perfect automation that's going to run for a whole year or something like that without ever talking to anybody. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, no, and that's amazing because you have like insane experience and insane success, like literally millions of dollars of sales in with emails. So that's pretty awesome to hear the way that you're approaching it. What I'm kind of getting from this is like three things actually. I'm kind of getting that, number one is figuring out like, what are like when you're looking at your window, when you're seeing, it's like figuring out what's going against what you consciously want. What's your conscious goal, and then what's going against, what that goal is. And part of it is, like an unconscious goal to like, look good or not get rejected or have it happen right away. I think another thing about it is maybe like your general worldview, and
Yep.
biases. Like, if you've got a worldview of like abundance, and stuff, that's going to impact the way that you see things as well. But I think if that gets worked out, I think if somebody is like, all right, really paying attention to, like, well, what's the vectors that are holding me back? And you
Yeah.
can always, you can identify these really easily just by whenever you're just frustrated, whenever you're upset or you're frustrated,
I
like
actually had this.
there's right there.
I was like, I went to bed last night, but I wrote kind of a question down and kind of worked on this because I knew we'd have this call today. But I had like this example I wanted to share of something because the real fruits I've experienced with LOI, they don't come like when David says something. It's kind of like I get this like click feeling, like, oh, that makes sense.
Mhm.
That's not where it happens. That's not where the understanding's built. It's when I like take it off
Yeah.
after those recordings and go with a piece of paper, flesh things out, look at things and see things for myself. And then when like actual real world situations come up and I apply it there, and then I see the breakthrough.
Yep.
So I had this situation. Uh, so the way it started is like one night I was like, I kind of like glanced over at my wife. She was on her phone and I noticed she was looking at like camper trailers. She was looking at like nice camper trailers. We had like a pop up, if you know what that is. It's like
Yeah,
a
I
small
do.
camper trailer. You have to like pop
Mm-hmm.
it up and set it all up. It's nicer than a tent. We tried it last year and we had it, but it's a lot of setup. So I was looking at this thing and I was like, oh, like I started comparing it in my mind's eye. I was like, oh, this one you're looking at sounds way easier to set up and just kind of like put stuff in and just kind of take off. And when we get there, you can just open the door and say it's just ready. So once I looked at that, I was like, oh, this is that sounds like a way better experience. Why don't you just get that and get rid of the old one?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so then she's like pretty quick at doing things. So she like sold the old one. She sold it for more than she bought it for,
Oh,
and then
hell
she
yeah.
had the other one was on order for like 2 weeks. So the like things nowadays, you want to get something that has to go get built, like because there's just not much supply. So
Oh,
for 2 weeks,
okay.
they're building it at like Indianapolis. So then I started noticing something. I started noticing I was like anxious. I was like, because this is a big camper. It's like 20 something feet,
Oh,
and
nice.
um, I was like anxious, and I was like, what? Why am I anxious? So this is like one of the signals. Is like bad feelings. I'll like
Yeah.
start noting them. I'll like kind of I write in a note like a little notebook. It's kind of like this size. Um, so I'll write like every day in one of those kind of notebooks.
I just use Evernote. I'll bust out Evernote and I just like start going because this is on me all the time.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Like I'll carry mine around with me too, and I'll acknowledge that hey, there's this like anxious feeling or this bad feeling or this kind of crappy feeling, and when I started digging around with it, I was watching some videos and I noticed like other people they'd say, "Hey, I got my new trailer, but we're really anxious," and
Mm.
we feel kind of like like not scared, but just kind of uneasy about it. And the more I looked at it, it was like it had to do with backing it up, like backing this freaking thing up.
Oh,
Like you
that's what
attach
you're
it to
worried
your
about.
truck, but then you have like 20 feet of something you're trying to back up.
Yeah.
And when I looked at it, it was like my notes were like that it was like this blind spot or this like blurry or kind of fuzzy, dark spot in my mind's eye because I couldn't really. It just felt like kind of not scary, but it was just uneasy. Like how's it going to back up? Like what if I run into something? Um, what if I just can't back it up? And I kept poking around with that idea, and uh, I found like a method that I thought was pretty valuable. That's what I was bringing this up. Is when you're backing up a trailer, like so you're trying to get the thing straight, right? If you're trying to back it in your driveway, you're trying to just get it straight,
Yeah.
obviously. And what you're using is mirrors. So you're like looking to your left and looking to your right. So when you start backing up a trailer, you say your trailer, like you see it swinging this way out of your left
Mhm.
mirror. It's counterintuitive. So what you're going to feel like is you're going to be like, oh, it's swinging left. So I'm going to want to turn right to correct it, because that will
Mhm.
make the trailer straighten itself out. But what actually happens is it just goes more left. And then
Mhm.
you're like, oh crap. And then you're like going like this and trying to be like, you're looking at the mirrors and you're kind of freaking out because you're like going to run to the mailbox or something.
Mhm.
So the method is actually, you see it swing left. What you do is you turn into the problem, you turn
Ah,
left, and then it'll correct itself, and then the trailer gets straight again. And
yeah.
so I played that out in my mind's eye before I ever got the trailer. I was like, okay, so turn into the problem. Like look at the mirrors, turn into the problem
Run into the problem.
instead of away from it. And it felt like this metaphor for other things too. When we
Super
see
meta. Yeah.
um, these problems pop up, we see like a bad feeling, and we're like, okay, this this kind of sucks, or I'm feeling, uh, like afraid of this thing, or I want to kind of put it back under the like, yeah, like I want to get a raise, but I feel like I shouldn't do that because it seems like something's gonna go wrong. If you actually turn into it and just kind of leave the question open, um, and poke around with it, that's actually where the fruits are. Like you don't get the fruits by avoiding it, just kind of throwing it back in.
Yeah.
Your mind's throwing this thing up for a reason. You don't get the fruits by kind of shoving it back under and saying, okay, I'm just gonna not do that because it sounds bad. So
I totally agree with you. And I think that's awesome. And what a great image to give people. I know I'm going to use that, like turn into the problem, like you're backing up a trailer. Um, I noticed that actually this week because, I'm going, I recently gotten divorced. And so I'm having these discussions about custody. And it's interesting because I realized like I was getting like very, very frustrated, and really
mm,
angry. And the reason, like, I'm not, without getting into details, is because like I want to have these conversations, and I felt like, my ex-wife wasn't coming to the table to have these conversations. And I thought about it, and it was like, like I was angry, and well, like that's the signal, turn into the
yep,
problem. Why are you angry? Why am I frustrated? Why am I feeling bad? Why are these bad feelings? That is a full access to figuring out what's going on. And what I found out, what I discovered is that like my goal is, I'm dedicated to my children and,
mm-hmm,
to having them a certain amount of time and to building a certain life for them. But then I've got this other goal to like not be disrespected, by
yep,
my ex. And I'm like, and it's just like just give it up, man. Just like give up that goal. And it's easier said than done, especially like in the moment, or especially if you're tired or you're hungry or whatever, but like to be like, okay, let's examine what's going on. And there's always a contradiction. Like every time
yep.
you're angry, there's always, you're pressing on the gas pedal, but you're jamming on the brakes at the same time,
And
and
David
I,
said like there's a formula for it. Anger is always someone standing in my way. It's a
yeah,
person, and it's like I'm angry at them, and you can kind of like denut it once you see that. Frustration is like there's a thing in my way. Same thing. It's just a thing versus a person. Anger and frustration.
totally. Yeah. And what I find like a lot of times the thing, that negative vector, a lot of times it's almost always hidden, I mean, otherwise
Yep.
you would just know it very easily. But it's a lot of times it's when I look at because we have members in our coaching programs, and I find it's kind of like it's always like fear of rejection or a dedication to being comfortable or a dedication to like not do, like, oh, I want to get these clients. I want to be successful, but I also like want, to always be comfortable all the time. Or I also
Yep.
like don't want to try really hard. I was on, a webinar with somebody the other day, and they're like, in my business, I only do things that are fun. And I'm like, all right, well, there's nothing against doing things that are fun, but like, I don't think that should be your like, your true north. Like, it's not your North
Yeah.
Star is to only do things that are fun, like you should actually
Yeah. As
like,
soon as you go to build a backlink, you're like, okay,
not fun anymore.
Eric Fawcett had his his explanation of what we do, and it's click, click, click.
Yeah.
Like that's what you're doing. It doesn't have to be fun, but you build backlinks. Like they don't have to be like super fun, like you're playing a video game, but you're doing
Hmm.
it and it's part of the process.
Yeah.
So
No, absolutely. I think this has been, I think this has really been awesome. Oh, I think this has been really, really awesome. I did want to make this one point though. I had it like in my notes here, is that, like, so, all right. So the first step is like, you got a goal to achieve. You're noticing pain, you're turning
mhm.
into the pain to uncover, like where are you jamming on the brakes? Where's that contradiction? What I've found in many cases is that when I realize that contradiction, if I can let it go, what happens is my state of being becomes like super calm and confident and really like kind of
Yep.
optimistic about it. So it's like I remember, to the example from this week with my ex-wife, when I noticed like, oh, I just don't want to be like disrespected on this, but I'm like, what are you really dedicated to? Like, I'm dedicated to my kids and this goal for my kids. It
Yep.
like it washed over me where I was just like, oh, I know it's important. I know what I'm really after. And then
Yep.
from that state of being, operating from like a super clear window, or at least definitely more clear than it was prior to that, then I was able to plan. And,
Yep.
like from that state of being, like now it goes into proper planning where, it's sometimes, like when you do set out to make your plan, maybe your plan is I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And then if this happens or if that happens, then I'll, take these other steps. It's never like from the state of being that, I'm going to make the sale. Like your plan is not to like
Yep.
automatically win. Your plan is to like take certain steps, see what happens, and then, make your adjustments afterwards, which is, what you were
I
talking about
I
before
actually
also.
had something. I took a picture. I've got it up here above my head, but I have like this framework David shared a while back. I wonder if I could share my screen. I don't use
Yeah, you should be able to.
I don't
Let
see a
me
screen
make
button.
sure you can. Cool.
Cool. Can you see that?
Yep.
I like emailed to myself just a little bit ago. Um, so like this is kind of what I have like in my periphery, like pretty much all the time when I'm down in my office. And it's this it came to mind because it has to do with this line right here. It's David's creatively engaging framework. And this part that he like underlined, it's he says it's like the blueprint for creativity,
Mm,
opening up your creativity and creatively engaging something. And he says maintain importance. It's all about seeing. And it comes up a lot with David's material, like what are we seeing? And this has just been really helpful because like as you break these things down, you can see uh, like I have this here. I think it's been really important in keeping questions open. So like when
yeah.
we have kind of the crappy feeling or whatever, keeping the question open instead of allowing our mind to kind of get closure because it really wants closure. Our mind like wants to conclude something and just kind of close it up, and
Yeah.
or that's the feeling I feel it. But I also have this like habit of just not closing up questions before I see things.
And
Um,
it'll close it up even when it hurts you. Like
yep.
what I mean by that, it like if you guys have had the experience of like just like worrying about something that awful that happens, like the reason you're so worried about it, it's like this fear thing is because your mind just closes it up. It says this awful thing happens and then we're dead. You know what I mean? This awful
Yep.
thing happens and then I'm just screwed forever. Versus if you avoid closure, you basically say, all right, well, if this awful thing happens, what are the next steps that I'm going to take after that? And, that
Yeah, and
relieves a
it's like
lot
what
of it.
David's taught us is our mind's supposed to work like that, but we're supposed to interact with it. We're supposed to have a certain kind of relationship with our mind where that's a signal for us to pick that thing up and kind of like crack it open and look at what's going on there. Like because our mind it'll just keep throwing if it's like making money online or just making money, our mind will actually devote resources to like worrying about it. It'll like
Yeah.
pop up at a certain time and be like, okay, it's time to worry and feel bad. And then you kind of want to shove it back down and then it'll do it again. So it's trying to help our mind is trying to throw that into our field of consciousness so that it can we can work on it, but we have to like learn how to work on it.
Yeah.
This framework's been really helpful though, because it's like not relying on hope or a chunked up source. Like if we think, hey, someone's going to come along with the answer. This happened during COVID. People were like waiting for someone to say, well, here's how you adapt. Here's how you, in March of last year, they're like, there was people that were like trying to cut expenses and they're like waiting for someone to, maybe it's the government or some leader or a friend or something to just tell them what to do instead of creatively engaging it themselves. I find like decluttering super helpful. If it's like Discord at my home, which doesn't really happen very often, or just maybe physical clutter. There's all sorts of clutter that can kind of clutter our mind, and that can get in the way of just seeing. Like,
Well, that's what we were talking about with those goals. Those goals that
yep,
are contrary. That's like the
they're
process of
contradictions. Yep.
identifying them and dropping them. That's decluttering your mind to a large extent.
And then like avoiding closure. It's like, it's amazing how it's like noticing that you don't. I'll just be like, I noticed that I don't see something. I'll just acknowledge that, and then avoid the closure that I think it's my mind will be like, it'll just feel like it sees something, but it really doesn't. Like, and so just avoiding that closure before you actually see it. And then this method for more angles and perspectives is just poking around, like you were saying, going out and talking to actually just go talk to your boss. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen if somebody's wants a raise and they go talk to the boss about it? Like, what is he gonna? No, you're fired. Like,
I love that phrase. Like, what's the worst that could happen? I love that phrase because like that's what people say to you, and it's true. It's totally true. What's the worst that can happen? But it's like the worst that like what people don't realize that what's operating on them, and I'm like, this happens to me all the time too, is that, well, what's the worst? Like, what are you talking about? I've got this super important goal to always look good. What are you talking about? I've got this super important goal to not get rejected. I've got this super important goal to stay comfortable. That's the worst that could happen. These things, I'm crazy dedicated to these things. They're so primary. I am super committed to those goals. That's the worst that could happen. These things that I'm so insanely committed to could be violated, and it's like, that's what's happening. That's what's in that window. And people are just like, they're not looking at it. And, like when those things are dropped and they're going to pop up again, and again and again, but when they're like temporarily dropped, it's like the being of what you're really committed to, like, really shines forth. And I feel like that is a big part of seeing, like you clear that stuff away. And then it's like what you can see, like I see this on my coaching calls all the time where, members are trying to come up with ideas to like get clients, and it's like they can't think of anything. And like, for me, I see them and I just see like potential. I just see like, yeah, of course you can do this. And standing in that place where I'm not impeded by these like, feelings, like I don't give a shit if they get rejected, you know what I mean? Like I just want them to be successful. And since I'm standing in that place, like, it's like, oh, you could do this, you could do that, you could do this, you could do the other thing and do this. You know what I mean? Like there's millions of ideas that just come flowing out, And
but if you're like in this place of scarcity where you're like, I got one shot, the worst that happens is I'll just like be defeated. And you're just like obsessed with that, maybe the first conversation you have and it going exactly the way you think it will go, and time is scarce, and it's just, how are you going to stand there and get any results if that's what you're kind of stacking up against yourself?
Yeah, I feel like one of the worst songs / best songs of all time is that Eminem song, like You Only Get One Shot. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. He's like, you got one shot in life.
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah. You gotta take it. You gotta do it. And it's like, it's such a great song. It's such an awesome like amp up song. And at the same time, it's such utter bullshit in almost every single scenario you can possibly think about. It's such utter bullshit.
Like in reality, there are like waves. Like there's waves like last year. There's waves that'll come and they go, but it's like winning is really just about figuring out how to win and then preparing, and then there's going to be waves. Like there's always like waves coming in
Totally.
and going. So like,
There's
I
always
think we just
another
live in a
shot.
culture of like,
There's always another wave to catch. You know, you're out surfing,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So
Maybe we
I'm
could
sorry to
talk
cut
about
you
it
off.
in another, no problem. Maybe we could talk about it in another session, but it's like David has this concept of how people look at, he calls it adaptability. I've got a poster up there I made for it, but it's like, he talks about how we're like, by default, we look at like our sense of happiness comes from looking at the resources we have, looking at how smart we feel, how strong we feel, how favorable the environment feels. And that's why we get kind of caught up in these like waves of emotions. And sometimes we feel like happy if we feel like the environment's on our side, or we have resources on our side. Or if we don't, then if we feel like, hey, the environment's kind of crappy, I don't have the resources I want, I don't feel strong, then we feel like unhappy. And
Yeah.
and there's a way to kind of denut that, and it's changing where you're putting your focus, and putting your focus into something like method, like David's
Yeah.
method,
Oh,
and
yeah,
building understanding. You can,
we can go on that forever, man.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think this is a good time to wrap this up.
Yeah.
But I love the teaser, you know, for another session. We definitely have to do it. You know, one thing I want to like leave people with is you know, this question, which is, you know, where are you seeing this in your daily life, you know, or in big moments in a week? Where are you seeing this in your life where, you know, you're coming up with these moments of frustration or of anger or whatever it might be, you know? And the reason why I ask you that is to consider, you know, consider this. I'm not saying it's true, but consider that, you know, that is where, you know, you've got this contradiction. That is where you're jamming on the pedal and the brake at the same time. You know, and then just try to look in there and see like, hey, wait, you know, what's going on? What is my what is happening? What is that factor there? I know that for
Yeah, it's like
myself,
turn your
it's
attention towards the problem. And
yeah,
also David said it a lot, but it's like, just acknowledge you're not your mind. So the feeling that, the idea that pops into my mind too, I really associated by default, that I was kind of afraid of that trailer. It's kind of stupid looking back. It seems silly, but it's like I was afraid of it, or like
your
I
mind was
was not
afraid of
good
it.
at it or something. Yeah, but
Yeah,
yeah, in reality, it's like I'm a being. My mind was just stuck, and I just had to kind of show it something and flip it, and now there's no fear there. So
it's beautiful. You know, it's beautiful that like so many people can use this, and this is something you can use to achieve your greatest goals. And, you know, you could use it like, you know, you're in the freaking supermarket and it comes up.
yep.
Jason, thank you so much, man. This has been absolutely
Thank
amazing.
you.